The crack of the wagon wheel seemed to echo across the vast Wyoming wilderness, cutting through the silence that had fallen with the setting sun. Daisy Granger clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders, the chill of the autumn night seeping into her bones as she stared at the broken wheel with mounting despair. The journey to Jackson had already stretched longer than expected, and now this stranded miles from anywhere as darkness claimed the land. "Miss Granger," Xavier Prescott's deep voice broke through her spiraling thoughts. "We're not going to make it to Jackson tonight." The tall cowboy knelt beside the splintered wheel, his weathered hands assessing the damage with practiced eyes. "But we can't just stay here," Daisy protested, glancing nervously at the shadows deepening between the pines. Wyoming Territory in 1876 was no place for a woman alone after dark, even with a companion as capable as Xavier appeared to be. Xavier stood, dusting off his hands on his worn denim pants. His face was partially obscured by the brim of his hat, but Daisy could see the firm set of his jaw in the fading light. "We have no choice. I can't fix this in the dark, and we're miles from the nearest homestead." Daisy felt her throat tighten. At 22, she'd faced her share of hardships, losing her parents, making the arduous journey west from Boston to claim her uncle's property after his passing. But the thought of spending the night in the wilderness sent a tremor of fear through her. Xavier seemed to sense her distress. "I'll build us a shelter," he said, his voice softening. "We'll see morning, Miss Granger. I promise you that." There was something in the way he said it, a quiet confidence that stemmed not from bravado but experience, that made Daisy believe him, despite the dire circumstances. They had only met 3 days prior, when Daisy had hired Xavier to escort her from Cheyenne to Jackson. Her uncle's solicitor had arranged everything, describing Xavier as the most reliable guide in the territory, though he'd neglected to mention the man's imposing presence or the intensity in his deep-set eyes. Xavier moved with purpose now, unloading supplies from the wagon while instructing Daisy to gather what belongings she would need for the night. The horses, thankfully, were unharmed, and Xavier tethered them securely to a nearby tree where they could graze. "I need to collect firewood before it gets any darker," he said, checking his rifle before slinging it over his shoulder. "Stay close to the wagon. I won't go far." Daisy nodded, watching as he disappeared into the tree line. Left alone, she took stock of their situation. The wagon sat tilted at an awkward angle, one wheel completely shattered. Their supplies were plentiful, enough food for several more days, blankets and other necessities, but the broken wheel was irreparable. They would need to fashion a new one somehow, or find help. True to his word, Xavier returned quickly with an armload of wood. He worked methodically, clearing a space for a fire a safe distance from the wagon, then constructing a lean-to shelter using branches, the wagon's canvas cover, and rope. "It's not much," he said as he stepped back to examine his handiwork, "but it'll keep us dry if the weather turns, and the fire will keep predators away." Daisy had to admit she was impressed. The shelter, though rudimentary, looked sturdy enough, and the fire Xavier had built was already casting a warm, comforting glow that pushed back the encroaching darkness. "You've done this before," she observed, accepting the tin cup of hot coffee he offered her. Xavier settled across from her, the firelight playing across his features. For the first time, Daisy could clearly see his face, the strong line of his jaw shadowed with stubble, eyes the color of the Wyoming sky at dusk, and a small scar that cut through his left eyebrow. "More times than I care to count," he replied, taking a sip from his own cup. "The wilderness doesn't much care for schedules or convenience." Daisy found herself studying him with newfound interest. When she'd first met Xavier at the stagecoach office in Cheyenne, she'd been put off by his taciturn nature and gruff demeanor. He'd barely spoken 10 words to her during their first day of travel. But now, faced with adversity, she was seeing another side of him, resourceful, calm, and surprisingly considerate. "How long have you been guiding travelers through this territory?" she asked, warming her hands around the cup. "Going on 8 years now," Xavier replied, poking at the fire with a stick. "Started when I was 20 after I came back from the war." Daisy calculated quickly. That would make him 28 now, only 6 years her senior. "You fought in the Civil War," he nodded, a shadow crossing his face. "Enlisted at 16, though I told them I was 18. Fought for the Union, saw things no boy should see." He fell silent, and Daisy sensed he wouldn't say more on the subject. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Xavier looked up, seeming surprised by her sympathy. "It was a long time ago. This life suits me better. Out here, things are simpler." "Is that why you became a guide? For the solitude?" A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Partly. Also discovered I have a knack for finding my way. People pay good money for that skill in these parts." "Well, I'm grateful for it tonight," Daisy admitted. "Though I'd be more grateful if we were in Jackson." Xavier chuckled, a low, warm sound that Daisy found unexpectedly pleasant. "We'll get you there, Miss Granger, just a day or two delayed." "Daisy," she said suddenly. "Please call me Daisy." "Miss Granger makes me feel like a schoolmarm." For a moment, Xavier just looked at her, then nodded. "Daisy, then." The way he said her name with careful deliberation sent a flutter through her chest that she attributed to the cold night air. "Tomorrow we'll assess our options," Xavier continued. "There's a small settlement about a day's ride east of here. If necessary, I can go for help while you stay with the wagon." Daisy frowned. "I'd rather not be left alone. It might be the quickest solution." "I didn't come all this way to sit helplessly by a broken wagon," she countered. "If we need to ride to find help, I'll come with you." Xavier studied her, and Daisy lifted her chin, refusing to be intimidated. After a moment, he nodded. "As you wish. But for now, we should try to get some rest." "I'll take first watch." "Watch? Is that necessary?" "Probably not, but it's a precaution I always take. These woods harbor all manner of creatures, some with 4 legs, some with 2. Neither are particularly welcoming to strangers." The reminder of their vulnerability sent a chill through Daisy that had nothing to do with the temperature. "I see," she murmured, suddenly very aware of the vastness of the wilderness surrounding them. Xavier must have noticed her discomfort. "Don't worry," he said, his voice gentle. "I've spent half my life in these territories. We're safe enough." Daisy appreciated his reassurance, though she wasn't entirely convinced. Still, exhaustion was beginning to take its toll, and the fire's warmth was making her eyelids heavy. "You should sleep," Xavier suggested. "The shelter's ready for you." Daisy hesitated, then nodded. She retrieved her blankets from the wagon and arranged them inside the lean-to. It was cramped but would provide enough protection from the elements. As she settled in, she found herself watching Xavier through the opening as he tended the fire, his movements efficient and practiced. There was something comforting about his presence, despite the dire circumstances. "Good night, Xavier," she called softly. He turned, and for a brief moment, Daisy thought she saw something warm in his gaze. "Sleep well, Daisy. We'll see morning." Those words, repeated from earlier, somehow carried even more weight now. As Daisy closed her eyes, the last thing she saw was Xavier's silhouette against the firelight, standing guard as the wilderness night closed in around them. Morning arrived with a gentle mist clinging to the forest floor. Daisy woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of movement outside the shelter. For a moment, disorientation gripped her, but then the events of the previous day came rushing back. The broken wheel, the wilderness, Xavier. She emerged from the lean-to to find him already awake and active, tending to a small fire where a pot of coffee simmered. He looked up as she approached, and Daisy was struck by the weariness in his features. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked, accepting the cup he offered. "Enough," Xavier replied, though the shadows under his eyes suggested otherwise. Daisy frowned. "You said you'd wake me for a watch. You needed the rest more than I did." He took a sip of his own coffee, then set the cup down. "I've been thinking about our situation. The wheel is beyond repair, the axle's damaged too. We have two options. I can ride to the settlement I mentioned, or we can try to continue with a makeshift sled." "A sled? On this terrain?" Xavier nodded. "It would be slow going, but possible. We'd remove the broken wheel, lash some logs underneath for runners, and use the horses to pull it. I've seen it done before when there was no alternative." Daisy considered this. "How far are we from Jackson?" "About 30 miles as the crow flies." "And the settlement?" 15 miles east, but it's little more than a trading post and a few cabins. They might have a wheel we could purchase, but there's no guarantee." Daisy weighed their options. The thought of further delays was frustrating. Her uncle's property had been sitting vacant for months, and she was eager to establish herself before winter set in. But trudging through the wilderness on a makeshift sled seemed both dangerous and impractical. Before she could respond, the distant sound of hoofbeats caught their attention. Xavier was instantly alert, moving to retrieve his rifle from where it leaned against the wagon. "Stay here," he instructed, his voice low. Daisy's heart hammered in her chest as Xavier positioned himself between her and the approaching riders. As they drew closer, she could make out 3 figures on horseback, moving at an unhurried pace. Xavier relaxed slightly but kept his rifle ready. Travelers by the look of them, not raiders. The riders came into view, 2 men and a woman. They reined in their horses at a respectful distance. "Ho there," called the eldest of the men, raising his hand in greeting. "Looks like you folks have had some trouble." Xavier lowered his rifle but remained cautious. "Broken wheel and axle." "You folks heading to Jackson?" "Just came from there," the man replied, dismounting. He was in his 50s with a gray-streaked beard and friendly eyes. "Name's Jeremiah Walsh. This is my son Thomas and my daughter Sarah." The younger man and woman nodded in greeting. They shared their father's features, the same sun-browned skin and keen eyes. "Xavier Prescott," Xavier replied. "And this is Miss Daisy Granger." Jeremiah approached to inspect the damage, whistling low. "That's a right mess. You're lucky it gave out here and not on one of the mountain passes ahead." "You know if there's anyone nearby who might have a spare wheel?" Daisy asked, stepping forward. Sarah, who appeared to be around Daisy's age, smiled sympathetically. "Our farm is about 5 miles north of here. Pa's got a workshop, might have something that would work, or at least the tools to fashion a repair." Jeremiah nodded. "She's right. You're welcome to come with us. No sense in staying stranded when help's within reach." Xavier and Daisy exchanged glances. "That's very generous," Xavier said, though Daisy could hear the hesitation in his voice. "In the wilderness, trust didn't come easily." "We've got plenty of room," Thomas added. "And Ma always cooks enough for an army." Daisy found herself warming to these strangers. There was an openness about them that seemed genuine. "What do you think?" she asked Xavier quietly. He studied the Walsh family for a moment, then nodded. "We'd be grateful for the help. I can ride ahead with you to fetch what we need while Miss Granger stays with the wagon." "Nonsense," Jeremiah said. "We're not leaving a young woman alone in these woods. Sarah can stay with her while Thomas and I help you bring back supplies." Again, Daisy found herself shaking her head. "I'd rather not be separated," she said firmly, meeting Xavier's gaze. "I'll ride with you." A flash of something admiration, perhaps, crossed Xavier's face. "As you wish," he conceded. "But we'll need to secure the wagon before we leave." The Walshes helped them prepare the wagon, ensuring their belongings were safe and the horses properly hitched to ride. Within the hour, they were mounted and ready to depart, Daisy on her mare, Xavier on his stallion, following the Walsh family through the dense forest. As they rode, Sarah dropped back to ride alongside Daisy. "Your friend is very protective," she observed with a knowing smile. "Xavier." "He's not my friend exactly," Daisy clarified. "He's a guide I hired to escort me to Jackson." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" "Well, he watches you like you're carrying gold dust. Most guides I've met aren't nearly so attentive." Daisy felt a warmth creep into her cheeks. "He's just being thorough. I'm paying him to ensure my safe arrival after all." "If you say so," Sarah replied, though her tone suggested she wasn't convinced. "What brings you to Jackson, anyway? Not many young women travel there alone." "My uncle owned property there, a small ranch. He passed away 3 months ago and left it to me. I'm his only living relative." "I'm sorry about your uncle," Sarah said, "but a ranch, that's quite an inheritance. You know anything about ranching?" Daisy laughed softly. "Absolutely nothing. I grew up in Boston. The closest I've come to ranching is visiting the public gardens." Sarah's eyes widened. "Boston? My, you are a long way from home. What will you do with the ranch?" "Learn, I suppose," Daisy said with more confidence than she felt. "My uncle's solicitor said there are a few hands who have stayed on to maintain the place. I'm hoping they can teach me what I need to know." "Well, if you need any help, our farm isn't far from Jackson. Ma would be delighted to have another woman to talk to. She's outnumbered by men most days." Daisy smiled, grateful for the friendly offer. "Thank you. I may take you up on that." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the forest gradually giving way to more open terrain. Daisy found herself glancing ahead at Xavier's broad shoulders, remembering Sarah's words. Was he being unusually attentive? She'd had little experience with guides to compare him to. By midday, they crested a gentle hill, and Daisy caught her first glimpse of the Walsh homestead, a sturdy log cabin with a barn and several outbuildings, nestled in a clearing surrounded by aspen trees. Smoke curled invitingly from the chimney, and a woman was hanging laundry on a line strung between 2 posts. "That's Ma," Sarah said, waving. The woman looked up, shading her eyes against the sun, then waved back enthusiastically. As they approached, Mrs. Walsh hurried to meet them, wiping her hands on her apron. She was a plump, pleasant-looking woman with the same kind eyes as her husband. "Jeremiah Walsh, did you bring home strays again?" she called, though her tone was teasing. "These ones need our help, Martha," Jeremiah replied, dismounting. Their wagon broke down about 5 miles south. Mrs. Walsh's expression immediately shifted to concern. "Oh, you poor dears. You must be exhausted. Come inside, come inside. I've got stew on the stove and fresh bread cooling." Xavier dismounted and moved to help Daisy down from her horse. His hands were strong and sure at her waist, and for a brief moment, as he set her on the ground, they stood very close. Daisy caught the scent of leather and pine that clung to him, and something in her stomach fluttered. "Thank you," she murmured, stepping back quickly. If Xavier noticed her discomfort, he didn't show it. "I'll help Mr. Walsh look for a replacement wheel," he said. "You should rest while you can." "I'm perfectly fine," Daisy insisted, though truthfully, the prospect of sitting somewhere comfortable was appealing after their night in the wilderness. Mrs. Walsh bustled over, linking her arm through Daisy's. "No arguments now. My Martha's stew is famous in these parts. You come along and have a proper meal while the men sort out your wagon troubles." Too polite to refuse, Daisy allowed herself to be led toward the cabin, though she glanced back once to find Xavier watching her. He nodded encouragingly, and she felt oddly reassured by that small gesture. The Walsh cabin was warm and inviting, filled with the aroma of simmering stew and freshly baked bread. Mrs. Walsh, call me Martha, dear, everyone does, sat Daisy at a large wooden table and immediately set about filling a bowl for her. Sarah, fetch our guest some cider, Martha instructed. And then tell me everything. We don't get many visitors this time of year, especially not young ladies traveling with handsome guides. Daisy nearly choked on her first spoonful of stew. It's not we're not, she stammered, but Martha just winked. I'm teasing, dear. Though I will say that Mr. Prescott looks like he knows his way around more than just the wilderness. Mother, Sarah exclaimed, though she was grinning as she set a mug of cider in front of Daisy. Oh, hush, I'm old, not blind, Martha retorted. Now eat up, Daisy. You'll need your strength for the journey ahead. The stew was indeed delicious, rich with tender meat and vegetables, and Daisy found herself relaxing as she ate. The Walsh women were easy to talk to, and soon Daisy was sharing her story. Her parents' passing, her uncle's unexpected bequest, her hopes for building a new life in Jackson. It's brave, what you're doing, Martha said, refilling Daisy's bowl without asking. Most women would have sold the property and stayed somewhere familiar. I considered it, Daisy admitted, but there was nothing left for me in Boston, and there was something about the way my uncle described this place in his letters. It sounded like freedom. Sarah nodded appreciatively. It can be hard, but there's something special about carving out your own place in this land. Pa says the territory shapes you as much as you shape it. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of the door opening. Xavier entered, followed by Jeremiah and Thomas, all three men looking pleased. We found a wheel that should work, Xavier announced, his eyes finding Daisy immediately. Mr. Walsh has the tools we need to fit it to your wagon. We can head back in the morning and have you on your way to Jackson by tomorrow afternoon. Relief washed over Daisy. That's wonderful news. Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Think nothing of it, Jeremiah replied, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. Neighbors help neighbors out here. You do the same. Martha was already bustling about, setting places for the men at the table. Sit, all of you. No working on empty stomachs in my house. Xavier hesitated, looking uncomfortable with the hospitality, but at Jeremiah's insistence, he took a seat across from Daisy. As Martha served them, Daisy caught Xavier watching her, a question in his eyes. The stew is excellent, she said, answering his unspoken query. You should eat while it's hot. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth as he picked up his spoon. Yes, madam. There was something in that slight smile that made Daisy's heart beat a little faster. For all his gruff exterior, Xavier Prescott was beginning to intrigue her in ways she hadn't expected. The afternoon passed pleasantly, with the men discussing the repairs needed for the wagon, while the women helped Martha with household chores. Daisy found herself watching Xavier. Whenever he wasn't looking, the way he spoke with his hands when explaining something technical. The rare but transformative nature of his smile. The respectful way he addressed the Walshes despite clearly being a man accustomed to solitude. As evening approached, Martha insisted they stay the night. There's plenty of room. Sarah can share with Daisy and Xavier can bunk with Thomas in the loft. The arrangements made, they gathered around the hearth after dinner. Jeremiah told stories of the early days in the territory, when settlers were few and dangers many. Xavier listened intently, occasionally adding details or asking questions that revealed his own extensive knowledge of the region. You know these parts well, Jeremiah observed. Xavier nodded. Spent most of my life here except for the war years. My father was a trapper, taught me every trail and creek from the Tetons to the Bighorns." "Your father still living?" Thomas asked. "No," Xavier replied, his expression closing off slightly. "Lost both my parents to a fever when I was 17, just after I came back from the war." A sympathetic silence fell over the room. Daisy felt a pang of connection she too knew the hollow ache of being suddenly, irrevocably alone in the world. "That's a heavy burden for a young man," Martha said gently. "Is that when you started guiding?" Xavier shook his head. "Tried my hand at a few things first. Mining, ranch work, even signed on with a cattle drive heading to Cheyenne, but I always came back to the mountains. Eventually, people started paying me to show them the way through." "And you've been doing it ever since?" Daisy asked. His eyes met hers across the room. "Yes, though I've been thinking lately it might be time for a change." There was something in his gaze that made Daisy wonder what kind of change he was contemplating. But before she could ask, Martha stood and announced it was time for everyone to retire. "You'll want to start early tomorrow," she said. "Those clouds on the horizon looked like snow might be coming." The mention of snow sent a flutter of anxiety through Daisy. "Snow, already, but it's only October." "Welcome to Wyoming," Sarah said with a laugh. "We've had blizzards as early as September some years." "Don't worry," Xavier said, his deep voice reassuring. "We'll have you in Jackson before any serious weather hits." As they prepared for bed, Daisy found herself thinking about Xavier's words from the night before. "We'll see morning." There had been such certainty in his voice, as if by sheer force of will he could hold back the dangers of the night. It made her wonder what other promises he kept with that same unwavering determination. Sarah's room was small but comfortable, with a patchwork quilt on the bed and handmade curtains at the window. As they settled in for the night, Sarah propped herself up on one elbow, her expression curious. "So, are you really not interested in your guide? Because the way he looks at you when you're not watching suggests he might be interested in more than just delivering you safely to Jackson." Daisy felt her face grow warm. "You're imagining things. Xavier is reserved, professional." Sarah hummed skeptically. "I've seen how professional men look at women and that's not it, but if you're not interested—" "I didn't say that," Daisy protested, then immediately regretted it as Sarah's face lit up with triumph. "I knew it. There's definitely something there." Daisy sighed, pulling the quilt up to her chin. "Even if there were, which I'm not saying there is, it wouldn't matter. In a few days, he'll deliver me to Jackson, collect his fee, and be on his way. That's the arrangement." Sarah's smile turned sympathetic. "Plans change, Daisy, especially out here. The territory has a way of rearranging what you think you want." With those words hanging in the air, Sarah blew out the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. Daisy lay awake for a long time, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the Walsh household settling for the night, and thinking about a taciturn guide with eyes the color of the Wyoming sky. Morning arrived with a biting chill that confirmed Martha's weather predictions. A thin layer of frost covered the ground, and the clouds hung low and heavy with the promise of snow. After a hearty breakfast, they prepared to depart, loading the repaired wheel and necessary tools onto one of the Walsh's packhorses. "You're welcome to stay until the weather clears," Martha offered, wrapping Daisy in a woolen scarf she insisted was just an extra. "Thank you, but we should get back to our wagon," Daisy replied, touched by the woman's kindness. "I don't want to impose further." "It's no imposition," Martha assured her, "but I understand the need to press on. Just be careful, both of you." Xavier was already mounted, his expression serious as he surveyed the sky. "We should move quickly," he said. "That snow won't hold off much longer." With final thanks and promises to visit once she was settled in Jackson, Daisy mounted her horse, and they set off, accompanied by Jeremiah and Thomas, who insisted on helping with the wheel replacement. The journey back to their wagon was tense, the dropping temperature and threatening sky adding urgency to their pace. When they finally reached the clearing where they'd left the wagon, Daisy was relieved to find everything undisturbed. The men immediately set to work, jacking up the wagon to remove the broken wheel and axle. Daisy did what she could to help, holding tools and fetching supplies, but mostly she found herself watching Xavier as he worked alongside Jeremiah and Thomas. There was an easy competence to his movements, a focus that excluded everything else. "Hand me that mallet, would you?" Xavier called, and Daisy hurried to retrieve it from the toolbox. As she passed it to him, their fingers brushed, and for a brief moment their eyes met. Something electric passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of the growing connection that Sarah had so astutely observed. Xavier cleared his throat and turned back to the wheel. "Thank you," he murmured, and Daisy stepped back, her heart racing for reasons that had nothing to do with the cold. It took nearly 2 hours to complete the repairs, but finally Jeremiah stepped back, wiping his hands on a rag. "That should hold you all the way to Jackson," he declared. "The axle's not perfect, but it's solid enough for the journey." "I can't thank you enough," Daisy said, embracing the older man impulsively. "You and your family have been so kind." Jeremiah patted her back awkwardly. "Just good neighbors, that's all. You remember what Martha said about visiting. She'll be expecting you once you're settled." Xavier shook hands with both Jeremiah and Thomas. "I'm in your debt," he said simply. Thomas glanced at the sky, where the first few snowflakes were beginning to fall. "You'd better get moving if you want to make decent progress before this turns into a proper storm." Xavier nodded, already moving to secure their belongings in the wagon. "We'll find shelter if it gets too bad," he assured Daisy, helping her up onto the wagon seat. With final farewells, the Walsh men mounted their horses and headed back toward their homestead, while Xavier climbed up beside Daisy and took the reins. "Ready?" he asked. Daisy nodded, pulling Martha's scarf tighter around her neck. "As I'll ever be." Xavier clicked to the horses, and the wagon lurched forward, the new wheel turning smoothly beneath them. For several miles they traveled in companionable silence, the soft hiss of snowflakes growing steadily around them. "The Walshes are good people," Daisy finally said, watching the snowflakes collect on Xavier's broad shoulders. "Salt of the earth," he agreed. "Not everyone out here would be so helpful to strangers." "Are we still strangers?" Daisy asked, the question slipping out before she could reconsider it. Xavier glanced at her, surprise evident in his features. "I suppose not," he said after a moment. "Not after what we've been through. What would you call us then?" A smile, one of those rare, transformative ones, curved his mouth. "Traveling companions. Fellow survivors of broken wheels and wilderness nights." Daisy laughed, the sound bright against the hushed backdrop of falling snow. "That's quite a mouthful." "I'm open to suggestions," Xavier replied, and there was a warmth in his voice that hadn't been there before. Before Daisy could respond, the snowfall intensified dramatically, thick flakes swirling around them and reducing visibility to mere yards. Xavier frowned, pulling the wagon to a halt. "This is turning bad faster than I expected," he said, scanning the whitening landscape. "We need to find shelter soon. There's an old trapper's cabin a few miles ahead. If we can reach it before the snow gets too deep, we should be able to wait out the worst of the storm." Daisy's stomach tightened with apprehension. "How far is it to Jackson from here?" "Still a good 20 miles, Xavier replied grimly. "Too far in these conditions." He urged the horses forward again, but their progress slowed considerably as the snow accumulated on the ground. The temperature continued to drop, and Daisy found herself huddling closer to Xavier for warmth, their shoulders touching as he guided the wagon through the increasingly treacherous conditions. "There," Xavier said suddenly, pointing ahead. Through the curtain of snow, Daisy could just make out the dark shape of a small cabin nestled among the pines. "We'll shelter there until the storm passes." Relief flooded through her as they approached the cabin. It was small and clearly long abandoned, but the roof appeared intact, and the walls would provide welcome protection from the wind that was beginning to howl around them. Xavier jumped down from the wagon, immediately sinking ankle-deep in snow. "Stay here while I check inside," he instructed, drawing his pistol as a precaution. Daisy watched anxiously as he approached the cabin, pushed open the door, and disappeared inside. A moment later he reappeared, holstering his weapon. "It's empty, just as I expected." "Not much to it, but it'll keep us warm and dry." He helped Daisy down from the wagon, then quickly unhitched the horses and led them to a lean-to attached to the side of the cabin. "They'll be sheltered enough here," he explained, rubbing down the animals with handfuls of straw he found inside. "Let's get our supplies inside before we lose daylight completely." Working together, they transferred their essential provisions into the cabin, which consisted of a single room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, and a narrow bed frame covered with a dusty mattress. The air was stale but dry, and Daisy immediately set about clearing away the worst of the dust, while Xavier built a fire in the hearth. Soon, the small space was filled with the warm glow of firelight, and Daisy's spirits lifted despite their predicament. "This reminds me of our first night," she observed, arranging their blankets near the fire. "Except with walls and a roof." Xavier chuckled as he hung their snow-dampened outer garments on a line he'd strung across one corner. "Quite the improvement. Though I still can't offer you the comforts of Jackson. I think I'm becoming accustomed to wilderness accommodations," Daisy replied with a smile. "At least we're not exposed to the elements this time." Outside, the storm had escalated into a full blizzard, wind shrieking around the cabin's corners and snow piling against the single small window. Xavier moved to peer out at the whiteout conditions. "We made it just in time," he said. "Another hour and we'd have been in serious trouble." Daisy shuddered at the thought. "How long do you think it will last?" Xavier shrugged, turning back to face her. "Hard to say. These early storms can blow through quickly or linger for days. We should prepare for the latter and be grateful if it's the former." The reality of their situation suddenly struck Daisy. They could be confined in this tiny cabin together for days. The thought sent a flutter of nervousness through her that had nothing to do with the storm outside. Xavier seemed to sense her discomfort. "I'll take the floor," he said, nodding toward the bed. "You should have the bed such as it is." "That hardly seems fair," Daisy protested. "You've barely slept since the wheel broke." "I've slept on worse than a cabin floor," Xavier assured her, already spreading his bedroll near the hearth. Daisy wanted to argue further but recognized the stubborn set of his jaw. "Thank you," she said instead, sitting on the edge of the bed. Despite the musty smell of the mattress, it was more comfortable than sleeping on the ground had been. As darkness fell completely outside, they shared a simple meal of jerky, hard biscuits, and coffee. The firelight cast long shadows across the cabin walls, and the howling wind created an oddly intimate atmosphere, as if they were the only two people left in the world. "Tell me about your ranch," Xavier said as they finished eating. "Do you have plans for it?" Daisy wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "Truthfully, I'm not entirely sure. My uncle's solicitor said it's small but well-established, about 50 head of cattle, good grazing land, and a modest house. There are 2 hired hands who have stayed on to maintain it until I arrive. Running a ranch is hard work," Xavier observed, not unkindly. Especially for someone raised in the East. I'm aware of that, Daisy replied, lifting her chin slightly. I may not know much about ranching, but I'm a quick learner and not afraid of hard work. My life in Boston wasn't as genteel as you might imagine. Xavier raised an eyebrow, inviting her to continue. After my parents died, I worked as a school teacher, Daisy explained. The pay was meager, and I took in sewing at night to make ends meet. 12-hour days were the rule, not the exception. Physical labor might be different, but I'm no stranger to exhaustion. A new respect appeared in Xavier's eyes. I didn't mean to imply you weren't capable, he said softly. Only that ranching has its own particular challenges. I know, Daisy admitted, her defensiveness fading. And truthfully, I'm terrified. But what choice do I have? This ranch is my inheritance, my future. I have to at least try to make it work. Xavier was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. I could stay on for a while, help you get settled. Show you the basics. Daisy's heart skipped a beat. You would do that, he met her gaze, and something in his eyes made her breath catch. If you wanted me to. I know the territory, the people. It wouldn't be a burden. But your guiding work, as I mentioned at the Walshes, I've been thinking about a change. He shrugged, a casual gesture that somehow seemed anything but. Winter's coming anyway. Most folks don't travel much once the heavy snows set in. Daisy tried to contain the surge of hope that rose within her. I wouldn't want you to feel obligated. It's not obligation, Xavier said firmly. It's a choice. My choice. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken possibilities. Daisy found herself acutely aware of how close they were sitting, of the firelight playing across Xavier's strong features, of the isolation that surrounded them. Then yes, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I would appreciate your help, very much. Something like relief crossed Xavier's face, followed quickly by a smile that transformed his usually serious expression. Good. That's good. They fell into silence again, but it was different now, expectant, filled with a subtle tension that hadn't been there before. Daisy found herself stealing glances at Xavier as he stoked the fire, noticing things she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge before. The graceful strength of his hands, the way his shirt stretched across his broad shoulders, the curl of dark hair at the nape of his neck. When he caught her looking, she didn't glance away. Instead, she held his gaze, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire spreading through her. It's getting late, Xavier said, his voice rougher than usual. We should try to get some rest. Daisy nodded, reluctantly breaking the connection between them. She retreated to the bed, arranging the blankets as Xavier banked the fire to last through the night. Good night, Xavier, she said as she settled beneath the covers. He looked over at her, his expression unreadable in the dimming light. Good night, Daisy, sleep well. As she closed her eyes, listening to the storm rage outside and Xavier's quiet movements as he prepared for sleep, Daisy realized that somewhere between the broken wagon wheel and this snowbound cabin, her journey had veered onto an unexpected path, one that might lead to far more than just a new home in Jackson. The storm continued through the night, but Daisy slept soundly, lulled by the knowledge that they were secure within the cabin's walls. She woke to the soft sounds of Xavier moving about, rekindling the fire and preparing coffee. Morning, he greeted her as she sat up, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Storm still going, but not as fierce as last night. Daisy pushed aside the blankets and moved to the window. Outside, the world was transformed into a pristine white landscape, snow piled high against the cabin. The sky remained gray and heavy with clouds, but the violent winds had diminished to occasional gusts. It's beautiful, she murmured, her breath fogging the cold glass. Xavier appeared at her side, offering a steaming cup of coffee. "Beautiful but treacherous. We won't be traveling today." Daisy accepted the cup, their fingers brushing in the exchange. The simple contact sent a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the hot beverage. "I checked on the horses," Xavier continued, seemingly unaware of her reaction. "They're comfortable enough in the lean-to. I gave them extra feed since we'll be here at least another day." "At least we're not short on provisions," Daisy observed, moving to sit near the fire. "Thanks to the Walshes." Xavier nodded, joining her. "They were generous." "Good people are rare enough in this territory that when you find them, it's worth remembering." "Like you," Daisy said impulsively, then flushed when Xavier looked at her in surprise. "I mean, you've been kind, beyond what I paid you for, a shadow of something embarrassment, pleasure." Crossed his features. "It's nothing special, just decent behavior." "Not everyone would define decent behavior as spending extra weeks helping a stranger establish a ranch," Daisy pointed out. "That's exceptional kindness, Xavier," he shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with her praise. "Maybe I have my own reasons." "Such as?" Xavier hesitated, then met her gaze directly. "Maybe I'm not ready to say goodbye when we reach Jackson." The simple admission hung in the air between them, fraught with meaning that Daisy was both afraid to interpret and desperate to understand. "Oh," she breathed, suddenly very aware of her disheveled appearance and the intimacy of their situation. Xavier looked away, jaw tightening. "Forgive me, that was inappropriate." "No," Daisy said quickly, reaching out to touch his arm. "It wasn't inappropriate, it was honest." His eyes returned to hers, searching her face. "And how do you feel about that honesty?" Daisy took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I find that I'm not ready to say goodbye either." A smile, the full, transformative one that Daisy was coming to cherish, spread across Xavier's face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Well," he said softly, "that's fortunate." The tension between them shifted, becoming something warmer, more hopeful. Daisy found herself smiling back, a bubbling happiness rising in her chest that seemed incongruous with their snowbound predicament. "So," Xavier said, clearing his throat, "since we're stuck here for the day, perhaps you'd like to begin your ranching education." Daisy laughed, grateful for the slight easing of the emotional intensity. "By all means, Professor Prescott. I'm eager to learn." They spent the morning with Xavier explaining the basics of cattle ranching, the seasonal rhythms, the challenges of Wyoming winters, the economics of the beef market. Daisy listened attentively, asking questions that occasionally surprised Xavier with their insight. "You really are a quick study," he remarked as they shared a midday meal of dried fruit and jerky. "I told you," Daisy replied with a teasing smile. "Just because I'm from Boston doesn't mean I can't adapt." "I'm beginning to believe it," Xavier admitted. "Though there's a difference between understanding theory and applying it when you're knee-deep in mud during calving season." Daisy grimaced. "That sounds messy." Xavier laughed, the sound rich and warm in the confines of the cabin. "It is, but there's something satisfying about it too. Bringing new life into the world, watching the herd grow and thrive under your care." "You sound like you miss it," Daisy observed. "Have you worked as a rancher before?" Xavier nodded, his expression growing distant. "After the war, before I started guiding, worked on a spread south of Cheyenne for a couple of years. The owner, Old Man Rutledge, taught me most of what I know about cattle." "Why did you leave?" A shadow crossed Xavier's face. "Rutledge died. His son took over and had different ideas about how things should be run. We didn't see eye to eye. I moved on." There was more to the story, Daisy sensed, but she didn't press. Instead, she asked, "Do you ever think about having your own ranch?" "Used to dream about it," Xavier admitted. "Saving up, finding the right piece of land. but guiding doesn't leave much time for putting down roots. And now, Daisy asked softly, do you still dream about it? Xavier looked at her, his gaze intense. I'm starting to dream about a lot of things I'd given up on. The air between them thickened again, and Daisy found herself holding her breath. Xavier leaned forward slightly, his eyes dropping to her lips, and Daisy felt herself drawn toward him as if by some invisible force. A sudden crack and thump from outside broke the moment, a heavy load of snow sliding from the cabin roof. They both startled, then laughed nervously at their reaction. I should check on the horses, Xavier said, standing abruptly. Make sure that didn't spook them. As he donned his coat and stepped outside, Daisy pressed her hands to her flushed cheeks, her heart racing. What was happening between them was developing faster than she'd anticipated, accelerated perhaps by their isolated circumstances. Yet it didn't feel rushed or artificial, rather. It seemed like the natural unfolding of something that had been there from the beginning, waiting only for the right conditions to flourish. Xavier returned a few minutes later, bringing with him a gust of cold air and a dusting of snow. Horses are fine, he reported, shaking off his coat. Snow's letting up a bit. If it continues like this, we might be able to travel tomorrow. The news should have pleased Daisy, but she felt an unexpected twinge of disappointment. Their time in the cabin, despite the circumstances that had forced it, had become precious to her, a space outside the normal flow of life where they could simply be together, learning each other. That's good, she said, trying to sound enthusiastic. I'm eager to see this ranch I've inherited. Xavier studied her face. But, he prompted gently. Daisy hesitated, then decided on honesty. But I've found I'm enjoying this time with you despite the circumstances. It feels like we're in our own little world here. Xavier's expression softened. I know what you mean, he said, moving to sit beside her again. But we'll have time in Jackson too. Different circumstances, but the same people. Will it be the same, though? Daisy asked, voicing her fear. Once we're back among others with responsibilities and expectations. Xavier reached out, hesitantly at first, then with more confidence, and took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses but warm against her skin. That depends on us, he said, on what we want this to be. Daisy looked down at their joined hands. And what do you want it to be, Xavier? He was quiet for so long that she feared she'd pushed too far. But when she raised her eyes to his face, what she saw there made her breath catch, a vulnerability, a hope that mirrored her own. I want a chance, he said finally. To see if what I'm feeling, what I think we both might be feeling, can grow into something real and lasting. I haven't wanted that with anyone in a very long time. The simple honesty of his words moved her deeply. I want that too, Daisy whispered. A chance. Xavier's hand tightened on hers, and he leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. But Daisy remained still, her heart pounding as he closed the distance between them. His lips met hers with gentle hesitation, a question more than a demand. Daisy answered by pressing closer, her free hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the steady thump of his heartbeat beneath her palm. The kiss deepened, becoming something warm and certain, a promise exchanged without words. When they finally broke apart, Xavier rested his forehead against hers, his breathing slightly uneven. I've been wanting to do that since the night the wagon broke, he admitted. Daisy smiled, her fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt. That long? Xavier chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest. Possibly since the moment you hired me in Cheyenne and informed me that you expected to reach Jackson with all due haste in that proper Boston accent. Daisy pulled back, laughing in surprise. I was trying to sound authoritative. I was terrified you'd think I was just some helpless Eastern girl who couldn't handle the journey. And instead, I thought you were the most determined woman I'd ever met, Xavier replied, his eyes warm with admiration. Still do. They spent the remainder of the day in a kind of blissful suspension, talking about their pasts, their hopes for the future, sharing meals and quiet moments by the fire. As evening fell, the storm finally began to abate, the wind dying down to occasional whispers and the snowfall thinning to scattered flakes. "We should be able to leave in the morning," Xavier said as they sat side by side after dinner, his arm around her shoulders. "The snow will be deep, but the wagon should manage if we take it slow." Daisy nodded, nestling closer to his warmth. "How long to Jackson from here? If conditions are favorable, we could make it by nightfall tomorrow," Xavier replied. "Though we might need to stop at the Walshes again to thank them properly for their help." "I'd like that," Daisy said, "and to tell Sarah she was right about us." Xavier raised an eyebrow. "Oh, what did Sarah say?" Daisy felt her cheeks warm. "She may have suggested that you were looking at me with more than professional interest." "Observant girl," Xavier murmured, pressing a kiss to Daisy's temple. "And did she have any opinions about how you were looking at me?" "She might have suspected my feelings weren't entirely professional either," Daisy admitted. "Though I denied it at the time," Xavier chuckled. "Well, I'm glad we've sorted that out." As the hour grew late, the question of sleeping arrangements hung unspoken between them. Xavier, ever the gentleman, finally stood and moved toward his bedroll on the floor. "Xavier," Daisy said softly, stopping him, "the bed is wide enough for both of us. Just to sleep," she added quickly, her cheeks flushing. "But I'd like you beside me." Xavier hesitated, clearly torn between desire and propriety. "Are you certain?" Daisy nodded. "We're adults and I trust you, and it's too cold for you to sleep on the floor again." After another moment's hesitation, Xavier nodded. "All right, but only to sleep." They arranged themselves on the narrow bed, Xavier keeping a respectful distance at first. But as the night deepened and the temperature dropped, they naturally gravitated toward each other's warmth. Daisy fell asleep with her head pillowed on Xavier's chest, his steady heartbeat a comforting rhythm beneath her ear, his arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders. She woke before dawn to find Xavier already up, stoking the fire and preparing for their departure. Outside, the storm had passed completely, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. The morning sun broke through scattered clouds, turning the landscape into a dazzling expanse of white. "It's like something from a fairy tale," Daisy said, joining Xavier at the window. He smiled down at her. "A very cold fairy tale. We should get moving while the sun's out. Weather in these mountains can change quickly." They packed efficiently, loaded the wagon, and with one last look at the cabin that had sheltered them through the storm, set off toward Jackson. Progress was slow, the horses struggling through drifts that sometimes reached their chests, but Xavier guided them expertly, finding the most passable route through the snow-covered terrain. By midday, they had made good progress, the snow gradually thinning as they descended to lower elevations. As promised, they stopped briefly at the Walsh homestead, where they were greeted with enthusiastic welcome and knowing smiles when Martha noticed how closely they sat together on the wagon seat. "I knew it," Sarah whispered to Daisy as they helped Martha prepare a quick meal. "The way you two look at each other, it's different now." Daisy couldn't suppress her smile. "You were right, though I didn't expect things to develop so quickly." "That's how it happens out here," Sarah replied sagely. "Life's too uncertain to waste time pretending you don't feel what you feel." After sharing their news about the developing relationship and thanking the Walshes once more for their help, they continued their journey toward Jackson. The afternoon sun warmed the air enough to begin melting the snow, making travel easier but muddier. As they crested a final hill in the late afternoon, Daisy caught her first glimpse of Jackson nestled in the valley below, surrounded by the majestic Teton Mountains rising against the western sky. "Oh," she breathed, taking in the spectacular view. "It's beautiful." "Wait until summer," Xavier said, pride evident in his voice. "When the valleys are green and the mountains still have snow on their peaks, there's no place like it in the world." They descended toward the town, the wagon creaking beneath them. Daisy felt a curious mixture of emotions: excitement to finally reach her destination, nervousness about the challenges ahead, and a deep, growing warmth whenever she looked at the man beside her. "Your ranch is about 3 miles north of town," Xavier informed her as they approached the outskirts of Jackson. "We can go directly there or stop in town first if you prefer." "Let's go to the ranch," Daisy decided. "I've waited long enough to see it." Xavier nodded, guiding the horses onto a smaller trail that branched away from the main road into town. They followed it through stands of aspen and pine, finally emerging into a clearing where a modest but well-maintained log house stood, smoke curling from its chimney. Beyond it, Daisy could see a barn, corral, and several outbuildings, all nestled against a backdrop of rolling hills. As they approached, a man emerged from the barn, followed by another from the house. Both were middle-aged, with the weathered look of men who spent most of their lives outdoors. "That'll be Jim Harker and Pete Wilson," Xavier said. "Your uncle's hands, good men from what I've heard." The men watched curiously as Xavier brought the wagon to a halt in front of the house. He jumped down, then turned to help Daisy, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Miss Granger," the older of the two men called, approaching with his hat in his hands. "I'm Jim Harker. We've been expecting you, though we feared the storm might have delayed you." "It did, Mr. Harker," Daisy replied, extending her hand. "But thanks to Mr. Prescott's expertise, we managed to find shelter until it passed." Jim shook her hand, his grip firm but respectful. "Glad to hear it. This is Pete Wilson, the other half of the operation around here." Pete, a shorter man with kind eyes, nodded in greeting. "Welcome to Granger Ranch, miss. Your uncle spoke highly of you." A lump formed in Daisy's throat at the mention of her uncle. "I wish I'd had the chance to visit him here," she said softly. "He wrote such wonderful letters about this place." "He was proud of it," Jim said. "Built most of it with his own hands, starting with nothing but wilderness. He'd be pleased knowing it's staying in the family." Daisy nodded, then gestured to Xavier. "This is Xavier Prescott. He's been my guide from Cheyenne and—" She hesitated, unsure how to define what Xavier had become to her. "And I'll be staying on to help Miss Granger get acquainted with ranching," Xavier finished smoothly, stepping forward to shake hands with both men. "If that arrangement works for everyone." Jim and Pete exchanged glances, then Jim nodded slowly. "We could use the extra hands, especially with winter coming on. The decision's Miss Granger's, of course." "Mr. Prescott has my complete confidence," Daisy assured them, trying not to blush under Jim's assessing gaze. "Now, I'd love to see my new home, if you gentlemen wouldn't mind." The house was simple but comfortable: a main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen, and 2 bedrooms. Uncle Henry's personal belongings had been packed away respectfully, waiting for Daisy to decide what to do with them. The furniture was sturdy if plain, and the windows offered beautiful views of the surrounding landscape. "It's perfect," Daisy declared as they concluded the tour. "Exactly as I imagined from Uncle Henry's descriptions." Jim looked pleased. "He wanted it to be a place you'd be proud of. Said you deserved something solid after losing your parents." Daisy blinked back tears, touched by her uncle's thoughtfulness. "Thank you for maintaining it so well in his absence, and for staying on." "This place gets in your blood," Pete said simply. Wouldn't feel right to leave it. Well, I'm grateful for your loyalty, Daisy replied, and I hope you'll both be patient as I learn the business. We'll help any way we can, miss, Jim assured her. And with Prescott here too, you'll have plenty of guidance. After the tour, Jim and Pete tactfully withdrew to the bunkhouse, leaving Daisy and Xavier alone in the main house. As the door closed behind them, Daisy turned to Xavier, suddenly shy. So, she said, gesturing around the room, this is it, my inheritance, my future. Xavier moved closer, taking her hands in his. It's a good place, Daisy. Solid foundations, decent grazing land, reliable water source. Your uncle chose well. And now I need to prove worthy of his faith in me, Daisy said, the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. You will, Xavier said with conviction, and you won't be doing it alone. Daisy looked up at him, searching his face. Are you sure about staying? It won't be exciting like guiding, just daily chores and hard work. Xavier's expression softened. I'm not staying for the ranch work, Daisy. I'm staying for you, because what's starting between us feels important, worth exploring, worth building on. Daisy's heart swelled. Standing in her uncle's her house, with this man who had already become so dear to her in such a short time, she felt something she hadn't experienced since losing her parents, a sense of coming home. I feel it too, she whispered, rising on tiptoe to press her lips to his. The kiss deepened quickly, all the emotion of the past days pouring into it, relief at their safe arrival, excitement for the future, and the growing affection that bound them together. When they finally broke apart, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. So, Miss Granger, he murmured, a smile in his voice. What's our first order of business? Daisy laughed softly, joy bubbling up within her. I believe, Mr. Prescott, that would be dinner. I'm starving. A woman with her priorities straight, Xavier approved, pressing another quick kiss to her lips before stepping back. Let's see what supplies Jim and Pete have stocked. As they moved together toward the kitchen, Daisy felt a profound sense of rightness. The journey that had begun with a broken wagon wheel in the wilderness had led her not just to her inheritance, but to something far more precious, the possibility of love with a man who saw her strength, respected her determination, and wanted to build a future alongside her. Outside, the sun began to set, painting the snow-covered landscape in hues of gold and rose. Inside, Daisy Granger unpacked her belongings in her new home, laughing with Xavier as they prepared a simple meal together. The broken wheel that had seemed like disaster had, in fact, been the beginning of everything. The winter of 1876 passed in a blur of new experiences for Daisy. Under the guidance of Xavier, Jim, and Pete, she learned the basics of ranch management, how to monitor the cattle through the cold months, maintain the buildings against Wyoming's fierce storms, and plan for the spring calving season. Xavier kept his word, remaining at the ranch and working alongside the others. He moved into the bunkhouse with Jim and Pete, maintaining a respectful distance that raised knowing eyebrows but earned approval from the older hands. He's a good man, Jim told Daisy one evening as they watched Xavier repairing fence posts damaged by a recent snowstorm. Knows his business and doesn't try to take over. Your uncle would have liked him. Daisy smiled, her eyes following Xavier's movements. I think so too. As winter deepened, their relationship continued to grow. In the evenings, after chores were done, Xavier would often join Daisy in the main house. They would sit by the fire, talking about their pasts, their hopes, sharing books that Daisy had brought from Boston, planning improvements for the ranch. Sometimes they simply sat in companionable silence, content in each other's presence. Their courtship progressed slowly, deliberately, both of them savoring the discovery of each other. Xavier, Daisy learned, had a dry wit that emerged once his initial reserve melted away. He was well-read despite limited formal education, having taught himself from books acquired during his travels. And beneath his capable exterior was a gentleness that emerged in small ways: the careful way he handled newborn calves, his patience with the ranch's aging dog, the soft tone his voice took when he spoke to Daisy when they were alone. For his part, Xavier found himself increasingly in awe of Daisy's resilience. She tackled ranch life with determination, never complaining about the hard work or harsh conditions. She fell into bed exhausted most nights, but rose each morning ready to learn more, do more. She charmed the sometimes suspicious townspeople of Jackson with her genuine interest in their lives and willingness to participate in community events. By the time spring began to melt the snow in the valleys, Xavier knew with absolute certainty that what he felt for Daisy was love deeper and more certain than anything he'd experienced before. The question that remained was how and when to tell her. The opportunity presented itself on a mild April evening. The day had been filled with the excitement of the first calves of the season being born, and Daisy was glowing with pride at having helped deliver one on her own while Xavier supervised. "You're a natural," he told her as they walked back to the house after checking on the new mothers and their calves one last time before nightfall. "Most people would have panicked when that calf came breech, but you stayed calm and did exactly what was needed." Daisy laughed, still exhilarated by the experience. "I was terrified, but I remembered what you told me, that the cow would sense my fear if I showed it. And now we have a healthy bull calf as a result," Xavier said, his voice warm with pride. They reached the porch of the main house just as the sun began to set, painting the spring landscape in gold. On impulse, Xavier caught Daisy's hand, stopping her before she could enter. "Let's watch the sunset," he suggested, nodding toward the porch swing that they had installed the previous week. "It's the first really warm evening we've had." Daisy smiled, allowing him to lead her to the swing. They sat side by side, Xavier's arm around her shoulders, watching as the sun descended behind the distant mountains. "I love this time of day," Daisy murmured, leaning against him. "Everything feels so peaceful." Xavier nodded, his thumb tracing small circles on her shoulder. "Daisy," he said after a moment, his voice taking on a serious note, "there's something I want to talk to you about." She turned to look at him, curiosity in her eyes. "What is it?" Xavier took a deep breath, suddenly nervous despite having rehearsed this conversation in his mind countless times. "These past months, working alongside you, watching you make this place your own, they've been the happiest of my life." A soft smile curved Daisy's lips. "For me too." Encouraged, Xavier continued. "When I agreed to stay on after we reached Jackson, I told myself it was temporary, just until you were settled, until you felt confident running the ranch. But the truth is, I can't imagine leaving now. Not because of the ranch, but because of you." Daisy's eyes widened slightly, her breath catching. "Xavier." "I love you, Daisy," he said simply, the words finally free after being held close for so long. "I think I started falling for you that first night when the wagon broke and I promised we'd see morning together. I didn't know then that I'd want to see every morning with you for the rest of my life." Tears welled in Daisy's eyes, but her smile was radiant. "I love you too," she whispered. "So much that it terrifies me sometimes." Xavier reached up to cup her cheek, his thumb gently brushing away a tear that had escaped. "Why does it terrify you?" "Because I've lost everyone I've ever loved," Daisy admitted, leaning into his touch. "My parents, my uncle. The thought of loving someone as much as I love you and then losing you." "You won't lose me," Xavier promised, drawing her closer. I can't predict the future, but I know that as long as I have breath in my body, I'll be by your side." Daisy searched his face, seeing the truth of his words in his eyes. "I want that too," she said softly. "A future with you." Xavier's heart pounded as he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. "I was hoping you'd say that," he said, opening his palm to reveal a simple gold ring set with a single pearl. "It was my mother's. I've carried it with me all these years, waiting for the right person to give it to." Daisy's breath caught as she looked at the ring, then back at Xavier's face. "Are you asking you to marry me?" "Yes," Xavier said, his voice steady despite the nervous flutter in his stomach. "I know it hasn't been that long, but when something's right, you don't need years to know it. Will you, Daisy? Will you be my wife?" For answer, Daisy threw her arms around his neck, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that conveyed everything words couldn't. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, she was laughing and crying at once. "Yes," she said, her eyes shining. "Yes, Xavier, nothing would make me happier." With fingers that trembled slightly, Xavier slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. "It looks right on you," he murmured, raising her hand to his lips. They sat together on the porch swing until the last light faded from the sky, planning their future a wedding in the summer, when the ranch work eased somewhat. Improvements to the house, perhaps hiring another hand so Xavier could take on more of a management role alongside Daisy. As darkness fell completely, they moved inside, where Xavier had intended to say goodnight and return to the bunkhouse as usual. But Daisy kept hold of his hand, leading him instead toward her bedroom. "Stay," she whispered, her eyes meeting his with certainty. "We're to be married, after all." Xavier hesitated, his sense of propriety warring with desire. "Are you sure? What about Jim and Pete?" Daisy laughed softly. "Jim and Pete have been expecting this since February at least. I overheard them making a wager about when you'd propose." Xavier shook his head, chuckling despite himself. "Nothing stays private on a ranch, does it?" "Very little," Daisy agreed, rising on tiptoe to kiss him again. "But I find I don't mind. I'm proud to be loved by you, Xavier Prescott, proud to soon be your wife." Those words dissolved the last of Xavier's hesitation. With a groan, he pulled her closer, deepening the kiss. They moved together into the bedroom, closing the door on the outside world, sealing their commitment to each other in the most ancient and tender of ways. News of their engagement spread quickly through Jackson. The townsfolk, who had watched with interest as the Boston schoolteacher transformed into a capable rancher under Xavier's guidance, were universally approving. A summer wedding was planned, to be held on the ranch itself, with the whole community invited to celebrate. In June, as wildflowers carpeted the meadows and the mountains stood clear against blue skies, Daisy Granger became Daisy Prescott in a ceremony performed by the circuit riding minister. She wore a simple white dress ordered from a catalog and carried a bouquet of local flowers. Xavier, clean-shaven and solemn in a new black suit, watched her approach with wonder in his eyes, still amazed that this extraordinary woman had chosen him. The celebration afterward lasted well into the night, with music and dancing in the barn, food contributed by every household in the valley, and toasts to the couple's health and happiness. When the last guests had departed, Xavier swept Daisy into his arms and carried her across the threshold of their home, now truly theirs together. "Welcome home, Mrs. Prescott," he murmured against her hair. Daisy smiled up at him, her heart full. "It's been home since the day we arrived," she said. "Because you were with me." Years passed, and Granger Ranch, now known as Prescott Ranch, thrived under their joint management. Xavier's experience combined with Daisy's meticulous record-keeping and innovative ideas resulted in one of the most prosperous operations in the valley. They expanded gradually, adding land, increasing their herd, hiring additional hands as needed. In the spring of 1878, their first child was born, a son they named Henry, after Daisy's uncle. 2 years later, a daughter joined the family, named Elizabeth after Xavier's mother. A second son, James, completed their family in 1883. Jim and Pete remained with the ranch, becoming like uncles to the children and valued partners in the business. The Walsh family continued to be close friends, with Sarah eventually marrying a local shopkeeper and settling in Jackson permanently. Through the years, Daisy and Xavier never forgot how their story began with a broken wagon wheel in the wilderness and the promise of morning to come. Each year on the anniversary of that night, they would ride out alone together, sometimes revisiting the trapper's cabin where they had sheltered from the snowstorm, renewing their connection to their beginnings. On one such anniversary, 15 years after their first meeting, they sat together on a blanket spread on a hilltop overlooking their ranch. Below, they could see their children playing in the yard, the cattle grazing in the distance, the buildings they had expanded and improved over the years. "Did you ever imagine this?" Daisy asked, leaning back against Xavier's chest as they watched the sunset. "That night when the wheel broke, when you built that shelter and promised me we'd see morning, did you ever think we'd be here now?" Xavier's arms tightened around her, his chin resting on her shoulder. At 43, there was gray at his temples now, and the lines around his eyes had deepened, but his strength and the love in his gaze remained unchanged. "Not specifically this," he admitted. "But I knew, even then, that you were someone special, someone who could change my life if I let you." Daisy turned in his arms to look at him, her own face softened by the years, but still alight with the same spirit that had captivated him from the beginning. "And are you glad you did?" "Let me change your life," Xavier smiled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Every single day," he murmured. "Every morning we see together is a gift I never thought I'd have." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and crimson, they remained on the hilltop, two people who had found in each other not just love, but a true partnership forged in the wilderness of Wyoming territory, tempered by shared challenges and flourishing in the life they had built together. From a broken wagon wheel in the darkness had come the promise of morning, a promise that had extended far beyond that first night to encompass all the mornings of their shared life, each one a new beginning, each one a testament to the love that had begun with a simple pledge: "We'll see morning." And they had, together, for all the mornings that followed.